everyone. My name is Melodie Jones-Pointon.
And I'm the Reverend Thomas Dummermuth.
And we are excited to walk the Sunrise Road together today.
The Sunrise Road podcast is a podcast with conversations that connect and weave hope into the fabric of our shared lives.
Thank you for joining us, and here's this week's conversation.
Welcome, everyone. Our guest today is Bruce Reyes-Chow, a pastor, a writer, a podcaster, a former moderator of the General Assembly. As he said previously, he is a very important person for very few people in the denomination of the PCUSA. We are here today to talk about Bruce's new book, Everything Good About God is True. Faith, and we are so glad to have you here with us today, Bruce. Welcome.
Thank you. Glad to be back.
Yeah, you're back. You were with us a while back when you talked about your last book, In Defense of Kindness, and so at the end of that conversation, you were hinting at that you were writing something more theological, and that baby is now born after a couple of years. That was
yeah. It feels like it's about 5 years ago, but I'm sure it wasn't that. Though, gosh, it might have been 3 years ago, I think, at that point. So it had already been starting to be written and all that. Yeah. So it's amazing how long it takes, but it's actually it gets to percolate and grow and all that kind of stuff. So I'm glad to be talking about it now, finally out in the open.
Wonderful, wonderful. I'd be curious to start off, like, how did you come about writing a book like this? What moved you to do this?
Yeah.
In this,
I think there are multiple reasons. So I was a church planter for most of my professional ministry career in San Francisco. Planted a church that was mostly young adults, multi-ethnic, progressive, Presbyterian. The unicorn church that folks would love to have, but but I always wanted to hand somebody something that could prompt them without me having to give any disclaimers beforehand. To say, here's a book about faith, but it's a little academic. Here's a book about faith, but it's pretty white-centered. Here's a book about faith, but. And so I've always wanted to write something that was just a book that didn't center conservative evangelicalism. So it's not a book that isn't opposed to something. It's not a book that I certainly mention it and talk about the realities of our world, but it's not built on what we're not. It's built on hopefully what we are and who God is. And so an expansive, loving kind of experience. So I've always wanted to write something like that. And then about a year ago, or no, I guess more than a year ago, 3 years ago, I wrote a statement of faith. As I was just writing, and it turned into a longer thing than just a one pager, but put that out, was doing some work around it, and then decided this could probably be a book. So pitched it, and basically Broadleaf was my editor, was wonderful, and it was we both agreed that neither of us really wanted to read another book on deconstruction, and so. Not that it's a bad thing, but like not even what's next, but what else is there for folks who are kind of in a space where they're ready to build something or to understand something or to get prompted. So I wrote that. I wrote this in that regard, but also wanting the theology to be practical. So like, okay, so I write about baptism, but so what, and what does it mean, and why do we do it different ways? So this is a super audacious book because I try to do, here's the theological concepts of everything, and then what does it look like on the ground, all in 45,000 words or whatever it is. So I do baptism in probably 2,000 words, everything from what it is to be named and claimed, and then to why do some people sprinkle and some people are full immersion, and so it's like I try to do everything, which normally we don't want to do, but this is the attempt at it. And I'm actually really excited about it. My editor was wonderful. I could just I think I was at like 80,000 words or something. We had to get it all the way back down. That's not what we contracted for. We'd have to charge like $45 for this book, basically, if we went that long. But I got it all the way down. And so that's why it's very, very concise. I hope helpful to people at all stages of faith, but in particular, kind of those who are really exploring, for the first time or again. So that's kind of how it all started.
I think that's really challenging. I remember when I was in school and we had to write a whole bunch of one-page papers on theology, and each paper had to have 3 different points. And I was like, easy.
Yeah.
Can't you challenge me more? But that was like the most challenging paper to write because you have to be so succinct. And I think that is a challenge of today is, trying to be succinct enough because we live in sound bites and our attention span isn't super long. But then also to think about who we are instead of who we're not. There's like, I remember also learning somewhere along the way that no theology is done in a vacuum. We don't talk about God in a vacuum. And so most often we're reacting against something that we don't believe rather than thinking about what we do believe. And I think that's a challenge for the church and for pastors and for people of faith everywhere.
Yeah. No, certainly. When I was church planting, on the West Coast, we actually had people that were unchurched, like not went away from the church, were hurt by the church, which is, in some parts, that's a significant part. In California, people actually just never went. Like their parents didn't go to church, they didn't go to church. And so if they showed up at the congregation I was at, it was because they wanted to learn something. I mean, there was they showed up at a San Francisco Christian church. They didn't want to learn about all faiths. Like they were there because they were trying to figure out, is Christianity the place, the road they're going to take, or is this what? And so it very early on, I had to learn, and our teams had to learn how do we articulate a Christian faith that isn't proofing our theological, our political and social standing, but it's what gives it birth and what is the foundation of why we are a progressive, justice-minded church. And so it comes really out of, like, I never had an evangelical phase, in the conservative evangelical phase. I wasn't involved in any campus ministries growing up. I came out of what I think we all hope, a very healthy, mainline, progressive space. And that's all I've known. And so I don't dismiss, our colleagues and people who have had those experiences, but I write out of this is a really good theology to hold. Like there's nothing new in this book. I try to, all my friend critics, I'm like, you're going to read this. I'm like, yeah, we've been thinking about this a long time. I'm like, yeah, but nobody's put it together like this by the book. So, but yeah, I mean, it's really what many of us, I think, really hope for the gospel to be in this kind of justice-minded, expansive, generous space that provides security that I think you get from a false sense of security you get from more evangelical conservative spaces. I'm just trying to say, in complexity, you can have that same security and making a case for that. But anyway, yeah.
I love it, and I love it exactly what Melodie was saying to the how concise, how you get to the point in a very short time. It's a very personable book, and it covers a lot of ground. Can you talk a little bit about the title? I mean, this is a very, very bold statement.
I know
everything good about God is true.
So that's not what the original. So you've had authors on before. You all have written. I mean, whatever titles are. I'm one of those kids. I tell the story like that. I'm one of those people that if I knew how to play an instrument, I'd have a bunch of really great band names before I actually form the band. Like I'd be like, "Ooh, that's a good band name," but I don't know how to play anything. So I would always come up with titles, and then I have this whole list of things like that'd be a great title. I mean, In Defense of Kindness was like I love that title, and then I wrote out of that. This one though, I had a different title, and I don't even remember what it is now. But it wasn't very bold, and so when the editor said, "Well, we think it actually sounds more like this," I did not like it. I was like, and it took a while for me to come around. And then as I started writing, and they're basically like, the title is important, but start, write with this in mind, keep going. And eventually I came to really appreciate it, because even though I don't have this evangelical space in my kind of upbringing, was like, well, what is that even? What's good? Is everything about God good? Like, is God always good? And so I talked a little bit about just even thinking about how we define what is good, that is going to be diverse, but we're claiming the God we believe in is good. And so and now here's how I'm going to kind of explain, flesh out why I believe that. And the choosing faith was really important to me. That was always part of it. That I'm unapologetically that Christianity is not the only way to connect with the divine. I mean, and so that this is a choice we make every day, and that we are in this process of choosing being co-conspirators with God as God's plan is revealed for us. That there's choices that we make along the way, and so that was really important for me to say. And as you go through I call it a faith montage. It's a lot of choice words. I choose to believe this. I choose to believe this, so that it isn't an assumptive, this is just your truth. Like, you should just believe this. No, there's some choice to it, which then dictates action, commitment, discipline, there's repercussions for making this choice. And I think that was really important. And something I found just in pastoring, especially with new Christians, like, there was a choice they were making. And then it wasn't like, okay, I choose to believe. Now I can just kind of hang out. It was like, I choose to believe. And this now means something in the way that I move through the world. And that's where I think that choice piece for me is really important, that it's a bold, dangerous, risky thing to do, to claim faith in the form that, that I'm pitching for folks.
Mhm. I love that language, and at the same time, I got also hung up on that choice, and I wanna kind of dig a little bit on that, because you talk about choosing faith right next to talking about how this faith was actually handed to you, and you were raised in it almost by osmosis or in culture. How do those things connect to each other?
And so I think it's even almost more important to think about choice in the midst of being raised in it, because it's so easy to just, be. So an example, right? Pandemic, and what churches learned was that folks were not really committed to the church. We did not mean as much to people's lives as we thought we did, right? Folks, when you remove obligation, when you remove habit, all those things, you discover how important it was revealing to many churches. Like, well, why aren't these people coming back? I'm like, well, because they don't feel like they belong. We haven't created space that's compelling for people to say, I need to choose to be here because it makes my life and the world better. And so I think when you are raised in it, it's harder to make that choice. So the challenge for me has always been, am I going to choose to be this person who wakes up every day and believes in the resurrection? Am I going to choose to believe a person that believes that everything that happens is something that I have to have conversation with God about, this unfolding reality? And I could choose not to, and it'd be a lot easier. And even for me, I do a whole thing on denominations in the book, just to kind of help people. Like, I choose to be Presbyterian. Like, that is probably the most frustrating choice I make all the time, is to remain in this crazy denomination. But so I mean, I think it for those who have, I hope it's a jolt to be like, oh, I actually need to rethink this. That's why it's not just a book for new Christians. I think it's folks who may feel stale, may just need a prompt, I hesitate to say it could really touch anybody in their faith, in their Christian journey or faith journey, but I think it can, because I do push on, these aren't just words. This isn't just an idea. You have to actually think through whether you're going to choose to believe this, and then what does it mean for your rest of your life. So I think it's almost more powerful if you've been in it for a while, to be forced into those moments where you have to decide, is this really my faith? Am I going to choose this, or am I just going to keep going because that's what I do. So in many ways, it was a challenge for me to keep reminding myself about these things that I say I believe, I prayed about, we've been in church about, but do I really believe them? And then what does that mean?
I think that's really important, because we come from a tradition that believes that doubt is a form of faith, and that doubting is very important in our faith. And I find in the midst of everything that's happening in the world today, right now, that it's okay to say, I'm not sure if this fits. And certainly, I think, coming out of the pandemic and thinking about that as churches and what does fit now, there's a lot of things that I don't think fit my personal faith anymore. Some things I've really struggled to preach about and to talk about because I just don't see, after my wise age of coming up 50 in a couple years, like, is this still true for what I see and experience? And what I'm finding personally is that the more I ask those questions and doubt those doubts until you're, what is it? Doubt your doubts until your fear become, I don't know, whatever it is. But like, the more you explore those doubts, the more called to action I am. The more like, because of my faith and because this is what I believe, I have to now do something about it, which for Presbyterians is really hard. Do you think that's true?
I think there's two things you said that were really important. One is that we have always been a tradition where doubt is important, but we've failed to tell that story very well. I just feel like we have not told the story enough to say to those who are looking for security. Like, I really think that, during the booms of some of the more evangelical conservative churches, here's the 5 things I'm going to let you hold on to. And these are just true. And you could just not worry about them. Because I think folks are like, in the midst of everything going on, like, give me something to hold on to. And we have not been able to articulate that doubt is something you can hold on to. That actually is a pillar and what can make your faith even stronger. And I think that what I'm trying to do in this book is to just claim that story. Like, it gives me more security almost to know that that God is flexible and moving. There is no set plan in that regard where it's like everything is going to happen in certain, like, all of these things that I think people ask, well, what do you mean God has a plan? Well, let's talk about that. Like, what does that really mean? Like, and I think that part of that what I'm trying to do in this is acknowledge all those doubts that we've been having for a long time, but have really denominationally or culturally have not been willing to tell that story, or if we've relied on our legacies a little too much because at one point we didn't have to and we've forgotten how. And but I also don't want it driven out of scarcity where everybody like tell us how to grow the church, right? I mean, I think that's the other part, but
right.
I think this is a natural, like, tell the story well and folks will come if they're supposed to be there. I mean, I just really feel like that's where I start. And if folks show up and are drawn to it and we're connected with each other, great. But tell the story in a way that provides hope in the world and security of spirit in the world. And that is filled with doubt. And I've never had a problem with that. Like many Presbyterians, we've always heard that over and over again, but we don't do it. I mean, we don't tell that story well. And I don't, somebody's done some studies about why we don't do that well, I'm sure. But yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And that's why I hope this book gives people courage to go ahead and get that stuff on, because I think it's so cathartic for people. There's a genuine care. If you say in the prayers or pulpits to a community who's struggling with stuff, yeah, this sucks, I don't know actually what's going on. Right there with you. We hold this together, right? As a community, we can hold all of this doubt together, and that makes us stronger in many ways, right? So like, I hope it's accessible enough that folks, I try to take these theological concepts and really make them real. And I always had the editor was great. It's like, this is not a memoir, so you got to like step back a little bit, but like still your style is so personal. Like, how do you find that tender line? Because I think that's part of it, is like, yeah, this is real, but that means we keep going. Like, we figure this out together. So.
I actually love that intro with embracing the doubt, and what do you say? Someone is choosing a faith that holds you, helps you ask better question. In the beginning, you talk about like the moment of writing this book in a time when it often feels that our faith is hijacked. and
They had
how
to tone
you
that chapter down.
but I so feel that, right?
Yeah.
That this has done something to me that I at some point have come out and said things and took stances that I would not have otherwise, because I felt like they cannot just claim God for themselves.
Yeah.
I need to speak out too. At the same time, publicly doubting here. At times I feel tempted to say, well, is this whole thing even salvageable? Is there enough there in the whole package? You say I don't want to salvage the term evangelism anymore. You can have that, but you try to salvage a lot of things in that book, and and what kept you going in that? Not just throw in the towel.
Oh gosh, I mean, I'll get to the theological piece, but I'm grateful for all the people who have done work before us, because it could be worse. I always, when folks think about it's so terrible, I'm like, yeah, just imagine if people weren't doing work up until now. Like, it does feel terrible, and there's awful things happening around the world in our country. But could you imagine? And because I always feel like when we are too much about how awful it is now, we in many ways dismiss all the work of ancestors and giants of the faith beforehand who have done amazing amounts of things to get us where we are. And I always like, we didn't think it could be worse, but it could. Like it, and if so, we don't pick up that mantle and we don't keep doing that work. Can you imagine what we're leaving for the next 3 generations down? Like, how bad? So there's part of it for me is out of gratitude. Like, my grandfather used to kind of always say, I'm not going to see the end of wherever your kids are going to be, like, and without just like, I'm not going to be alive for that, but here's what we're doing, right? That's my thing too. I'm not going to be alive for if grandkids are in our future, or great, whatever. Like, I'm not going to be alive for them, but I'm going to make sure that I'm going to do the work now that is going to make it so that it is not, as bad as it could be if I didn't. And I think I just trust that what we believe has a good impact on people. So that's one. The second thing is, I mean, people can read this, and I mean, the only spoiler I think in the whole book is that I believe in the bodily resurrection. I mean, I think if you were to read most of other stuff, and if you were to, well, he's this progressive, liberal, whatever, clearly he's going to explain away the bodily resurrection and figure out a way that it didn't actually happen. And I actually have always said, you know what, it is so outrageous and unimaginable, and I choose to believe it because it means that truly out of death, new life can happen. And that's why that I'm going to choose to believe it's true, because I've got to believe that there is a better alternative. There is new life that is available. And that keeps me going, that there is this thing on the other side. Will often say congregations that I serve or help, like, are you a resurrection people or are you not? If you're not, then that's a different conversation. But if you're a resurrection person, regardless of how you want to define resurrection, then you believe that out of despair there is hope. And that can't just be really creative words in liturgy. That has to be, we actually believe that, and give people time to wrestle with that and struggle with that and to decide whether you believe it. And I choose to believe that that is true. And that comes out of my belief in the resurrection, which I need to believe that something, when I get into those moments like this is terrible, I have the resources to go away and hide in a hole and not pay attention to all this for the rest of my life if I wanted to just sit somewhere in some island. But I'm not going to do that. And so I've got to believe there is a reason that we're called to this and choosing this journey and these things we do. So continue to put myself out there, continue to engage in things, continue to believe that somewhere down the road, resurrection will come. So that's why. That's my sermon pretty much.
That's a good
every
sermon.
Fourth Sunday. Really, it's like, are you resurrection people or not? Feeling a lot of scarcity talk out there.
Yeah, it is. And I think that's why, theology in a vacuum and not doing negative theology is so important, is because I think out of that fear of scarcity, who are we defined as? And if we are a resurrection people, what we're saying and what I believe to be true is that the Church of God in Jesus Christ has gone through worse than this
Mm.
and made it through.
Mhm.
And the church does not need, this is the sermon night. The church does not need this building.
Yep.
The church does not need these resources. The church, in order to be the church, does not need these things. The church is the body of Christ. So how are we using these gifts? How are we using and stewardshiping all of our resources to be the body of Christ in this neighborhood with these people for this time? And that comes at a risk, I think, of being taken advantage of, being taken for granted, like a whole bunch of things that I think we're sort of afraid of, but I don't know that those are biblical. They're certainly not gospel. And
I think getting your church to be the place where you say those things and there's no shock. Right. Because to get to the point where the church doesn't need the building. Everybody goes, yeah, it doesn't. But here's kind of how we use it right now. Here's what we're doing now. But it's not. So where is the challenge for a community that is at the point where we just want to be the body and figure out how we do it? What's the next challenge for folks in faith? That's exciting when you strip away all that stuff and get to what's the thing that we're being called into that really is risky. Really giving up our building is not a huge risk in a big, guys are saying, it's not that big of a deal. And when you get to the point where people aren't clutching pearls over that, then you get to ask these really difficult questions, who's Jesus calling us to be right now? And that's really hard right now to think about, because it puts people at risk in many ways. And so, but that is, oh my gosh, that's where I get jazzed, a church that can really be we're called to be more than this. We're we have all these things, great, but let's go do the real work. And you get a church to be like that. It's so fun in the most faithful, joyful way to be in ministry and do that work. Anyway.
I keep coming back to the choice language, and one thing that struck me, and that it is actually really baptismal language that you use there. I choose and we reject and so on, and I find that really powerful. Out of that belief in the resurrection, that call to act as if you believe it mattered, right? There's a podcast I listen to of two German guys, and it's a basically,
is that the title of the podcast? Two German guys.
Two German guys. It's I love this things we don't believe, or it's outbelieved, and it is about things we still hold on to when things go past. And they talk a lot about different topics, and they come back to the church, and what they come back to the church is the church as a bet. That they and I heard that kind of out of your book as well. What if with the title, what if everything you believe about God is actually true? And kind of I hear you saying, I'm gonna bet on this, and this is a bet that I'm risking to be wrong about. Would that be
certainly? Yeah, I mean, I think I like to think I don't know that I'm right, but I believe that I am. I mean, I think there's the nuance of knowing has some kind of security, and I was and belief is, I think, deeper and more open and flexible. And so, I mean, I think that is certainly fair, because I'm very clear that this is a choice and a path and a way of being that is important. And I want to, if you are exploring this or you're figuring out if this is still where you should be, here's a version, one person's version that kind of brings in a lot of different things to help lay out one way of being. And I think that you'll notice throughout the book, I don't try to prove anything. I just kind of tell a story, and here's what we have believed and what I believe, and I try not to proof text anything. Scripture is sprinkled in, but it's certainly not the Bible proves the Bible's right kind of book. So, yeah. So I mean, I think you're right on it.
Mhm.
Yeah. I mean, I think I'm betting on the belief that I'm right on this one.
Mhm.
And live as if I just live as if it's true. Right? We
Mhm.
don't know, but live
Mhm.
as if it's true. So
And connected to that, what I also gather is like there's something adventurous about that, because that's not the end point. That's actually really the what gets you going.
oh yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think that this leads you down places that folks would have never expected themselves to believe they could go. I mean, I think that's, I think when folks are, really engaged in faith, and especially when it's not in opposed to anything, I think they're much bolder in the world about what they do, how they talk about and act and all those things with a understanding that's faith-based. And so I think that's where, if you wanted to, talk about where that influences how people connect to and find belonging in church, it's because people are out there doing work and they somehow mention this is where it comes from. Like, this is how it happens. This is why I'm here. And folks are surprised that people don't run away from them because they've evangelized in a way that actually is effective. I do a whole section towards the end around evangelism, and that as we move through the world, we are people of faith. And so when you do that and build relationship, then and relationship without a preconceived end, then you people are drawn to it. I just really believe that's true. It's not, I want to go do this so people are drawn to it. I'm doing this, and look what happens when you do this faithfully. I think folks are drawn to it. And so, is it a guarantee? Is it a tactic, a strategy? No, but does it happen often? Yeah.
Mhm. Well, I really appreciate the time that you've spent with us today, and appreciate your efforts here to get us thinking theologically. What is your hope for us as we're a local congregation, two pastors in a local congregation living in a very specific context. What is your hope for us? How will we use this book? What is your hope for the church?
Yeah. Oh, I really so one thing is, if you all do use this, if anybody uses this, I'll come in and Zoom. I love talking about my book. I did this with in Defense of Kindness book groups. I'll come in for an hour. I just, I love helping people think through and talk about it and all that. So here's my thing. I think in every space, folks are overwhelmed by how this book begins, right? Kind of naming the kind of 2020 version of politics and culture and everything. And this book kind of says, don't give up, right? If you have inklings, if you have thought that there must be a better way, they're kind of like, there is, there is, and it's not built on what we're not, but let's reconnect and reground ourselves in what you've been hearing, you whispers or directly or whatever, um, and there's security in that. I just feel like, especially in places where maybe geographically you might be politically, socially, theologically, kind of on an island, I think this gives strength to that. This is, the doubt is strong. It gives us strength. And here's all the things you might want to think about and talk about. I mean, I think for pastors, you hand this book to somebody and it prompts tons of questions. If you want people to explore faith, now some pastors may not want to do that work, but if you want people to be like, yeah, I'm intrigued by this. This is interesting. I've always wondered about this. This is the book to hand them that will spark all those conversations, encourage people to engage, challenge what we do in worship, rethink kind of all of that stuff in a way that I think gets people excited about faith and doesn't overwhelm with too much theology, but it's just kind of the whole thing. Again, it's super audacious for me to try to do this, but I think at the end I called it a monstrosity of love, because we kind of agonized over words kind of thing, like when we were getting really down. It's like, this sentence needs to go, or this need, and so it really, this is my love letter to the church and myself. So I hope folks can kind of read it in that way, and it sparks something for you all.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that. We actually, one of the things that I keep thinking is we've kind of we've done different books and different studies on statements of faith. But as you said, they always come with a disclaimer of this is a really good, but Shirley Guthrie is no longer with us.
Oh, I know.
And the book is so good. And it is written from a particular snapshot in time.
It is.
And
and I think those books were also written for particular readers, right? Of generational, not even just ethnic, cultural, but just kind of generational reading and vibe and everything. And so, I mean, they had I used the term clap back in the book, and some of the editors were like, do you think people know what clap back means? And I'm like, keep it in. I keep in some of that. It was really cute and funny. I'm like, no, we're gonna keep that in. Because they were still okay, so are the 6-year-old so-and-so, and I'm like, well, they might, but that's not actually completely who I'm writing for at this point. So they've had their books in many ways. Yeah. And so now this is kind of the next thing. So, but if you're, there might be some things that, miss some generational cues, but yeah. So hopefully it'll not replace, but kind of help broaden kind of our history of our theological kind of wide-ranging books out there.
Mm-hmm. And very timely for what's happening today. It's every thought happens in a particular space and time. And so for our particular space and time, even though I believe the church is timeless, the body of Christ will be here, long past me. But at the same time, there are some particular circumstances that I often have no idea what I'm doing, how to navigate all of this. And maybe that's okay.
Yeah, for sure.
Maybe that's where God is in the midst of us because we have no idea what we're doing.
Exactly.
So thank you for your thoughts and for your questions and for leading us to have conversations with each other and to be the church. And thank you for being very famous for a very small group of people.
Should put that on a business card if I still had business cards. That'd be my tagline.
You continue to lead a great number of us and be a great example. So thank you for that as well.
Great, thank you. That's very kind. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Sunrise Road podcast. Our podcast is hosted by me, Thomas Dummermuth.
And me, Melodie Jones-Pointon. And it is edited by Vince Rule.
The Sunrise Road podcast is a ministry of Eastridge Presbyterian Church. Please like and subscribe and leave a review.